computer. This is IMG Research Academy. In IMG Research Academy, we set out to demystify clinical research in every ramification. We talk about every aspect of clinical research, from case reports to interventional studies to how to extract data, how to analyze data. We are a group of doctors that are focused on understanding the tenets of clinical research and see how we can translate our understanding or how we can utilize our understanding to better patient outcome. That's what we do. Last year, we published over 50 papers as a group, motivating each other either independently or working as a group. This year, we set out to publish about 100 high impact paper. As part of what we do, we look for guest speakers who volunteer their time to give us a talk on anything concerning clinical research. Today we have a guest speaker and a seasoned researcher all the way from Canada. I'll allow her to introduce herself. Dr. Maha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Edward. Hi, everyone. My name is Maha Hassan. I'm a researcher. I work with the University of Toronto at the Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute as a research coordinator. I've been there for a few years now. I also work with the University of Kansas, their Department of Oncology, and also collaborate with the University of Nevada, their Department of Internal Medicine. So I basically have my hands in a lot of places. I am a researcher, a community-based and a clinical researcher. And I am super thrilled to be a part of this community today to join you. And thank you so much for the clip at the beginning of this session. I think passion and commitment is definitely extremely important, whether it's research or clinical field or whatever you're doing. As you said, even if you're sweeping the streets, put your heart into it and make the best of that. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, Dr. Maha, what are we discussing today? In research, there are different types of research. Our focus is not going to be on all those types of research. There's primary research, there's secondary research, depending on who you're listening to. There's retrospective, prospective, interventional, observational, epidemiological, different types of research. Now, qualitative and quantitative research. In all this, one very important one is review, looking at literatures and how you're going to either form your knowledge base or analyze those research that is in the qualitative or even quantitative research, mostly secondary research. And so one of those components is systematic review. Many of us have heard of systematic review. Sounds like a big word. We are all confused. Some people are, some people are not. And tell us, what is this whole thing about systematic review? I believe you have a slide to share. I'll allow you all the time in the world to talk. Members of the forum is a roundtable session, so feel free to chime in, usually at the end of our discussion, and we're all going to talk about it, ask your questions. It's one house. The aim is to gain knowledge and to grow.
Thank you. Yes, I'll share my screen. I basically just created a deck of slides to make it easy. Can you guys see that?
Yes, I can see it very well.
Okay, awesome. So sorry. So yeah. So I thought we would discuss the A to Z of systematic reviews. I think these reviews are extremely important because they make such an important part of evidence-based medicine, which I think was very apparent during COVID when no one knew anything. And the situation was evolving every day. And I think most of us benefited from these reviews to guide our clinical practice. So I think it would be helpful to just look at that. And of course, you guys are more than welcome to ask any questions during or even at the end of the session. So I'll start. This is an evidence pyramid. A lot of you might have seen this image. It comes up in research articles, and when you go online to read descriptions, this might have come up. It basically just summarizes all the different types of studies that are there, from case series, case reports that are very simple to put together, to case control cohort, RCT, systematic reviews, and evidence-based guidelines. So you can see that the RCTs and systematic review, the systematic reviews and meta-analysis are on top of the pyramid. What are systematic reviews? As I summarized here, it collates all empirical evidence based on pre-specified eligibility criteria in order to answer a specific research question, which means we specify the eligibility criteria and we have a question that we're trying to answer. It uses explicit scientific methods in a systematic way to minimize bias. When I say bias, that's very important, because if we introduce bias into our studies, we're literally just wasting everything. It's not going to be effective at all. So we have to minimize bias. How do we do that? By having a clearly stated set of objectives with predefined eligibility criteria for studies. By having a reproducible methodology, what you're doing is you're being completely transparent with your review. You're putting everything out there that this is what I did, this is how I got these results, so that if anyone else tries to do it, they're able to get the exact same results. You also minimize bias by having a systematic search strategy to identify all studies that would meet the eligibility criteria. You assess the validity of findings through the assessment of risk of bias, for example, and you have a systematic presentation of the characteristics and findings of the included studies. The value of systematic reviews. As I mentioned before, during COVID, we all saw how things were evolving every single day, and they still are in the process of evolving, in the process of evolution. So the value of this is that it helps support evidence-based practice. It connects the practice and clinicians to high quality evidence, which I think is very important. Here, I just put this slide together just to give you a difference, to summarize the differences between literature review and systematic reviews. You might have heard the term literature review come up very often. But what's the difference between literature review and a systematic review? A literature review is just a very superficial, an overview of what you're doing, versus a systematic review where you have your pre-specified eligibility criteria, you have a systematic search strategy, assessment of validity of results, interpretation and presentation of results with a reference list. It's very detailed, and like I said before, it's reproducible. The 7 stages of a systematic review. What I did here for this slide is I basically put down all the steps. I laid it all out there for anyone. A lot of you, I'm sure most of you you guys already know these steps and have already seen them in different papers when you read those. But for those of you who might be new, and also as refreshers, even for myself, it's good to just see the steps in front of us sometimes. The 7 stages are, so the way you start a systematic review is first you identify the research question. And there are stages to that, and we will talk about the stages. So first you identify a research question, then you define the inclusion-exclusion criteria, you search for studies, you select the studies, you extract data, you assess quality, and then you synthesize and present results. As you can see, these are like quite broad 7 stages. So it doesn't happen overnight. All of us who have done systematic reviews, we know that it doesn't happen overnight. It takes months of work to do this work done, depending on the size of your research team. Let's dive into the steps. So the first step that I mentioned, I'll go back, sorry, to this slide, was identify the research question. Now, before you identify your research question, you have to do a bit of a background literature search. The reason why that's so important is to identify any knowledge gaps. There's no point publishing things that are already out there that have already been published about. So you need to identify knowledge gaps. Whatever your area of expertise is, if that's not your area of expertise, whatever your area of interest is, you first do a background literature search to see what already has been published and where the gaps lie. This assists in developing a research question in a specific subject area. To identify the research question, we all know, we've heard of the word PICO, the PICO approach. Well, what is PICO? PICO is simple. It's basically PICO, where P stands for patient, problem, or population. What is the population that you are focusing on as a researcher? What is my patient population? What is my area of interest, the population that I'm interested in? What is their main concern? What is the main disease or the complaint that I'm concerned about or I'm interested in looking into? The next is intervention. What do you plan on doing for that patient population? Comparison. Is there a comparison to that main intervention that you're thinking about? And the outcome. What are the measurable results? What are you thinking in your head? What are the outcomes that you can think about extracting data on? The criteria for systematic review. So you have to develop a search strategy. Like I said before, everything has to be reproducible. What that means is you have to be transparent. Everything has to go on the paper, whatever you're doing. You develop a search strategy, you define your inclusion and exclusion criteria. What is inclusion and exclusion criteria, such as the years considered for publication? Some people might be interested in going all the way back to 1950s, 1940s and seeing whatever was published, whatever has been published to date. Others, on the other hand, might limit their search strategy to, let's say, 20 years or 30 years. Some others might be even more focused. Let's say with COVID, some people might only be interested in publishing or looking at, for example, the effect of COVID on cardiovascular diseases, for example. Some people might only be interested in what has happened over the past 3 years, versus others who might be more, would be okay to, like, take a more broad approach and might be okay with looking at the effects of influenza as well, for example, and past cases of coronavirus, because it's not a new disease. We all know that, so they might be okay in, like in considering the papers that have already been published. That would basically expand their years of that they would consider the papers that were published. The language, that's very important. There's a lot of publications, most of them are in English language, but we have so many other languages in publications. So it's up to you if you are interested in considering all languages that papers are published in. The problems, however, you might fall into is that you might not be able to find the translation, the English translation for that paper. So that is where a lot of researchers, they restrict themselves to English only. The publication status is also important. For example, are you interested in only considering peer-reviewed literature search, peer-reviewed articles, sorry, or are you also interested in including commentaries that are basically one person in that? For example, a surgeon is just comment who has like years of expertise in a certain area and a certain kind of surgery, and they would be like they'd be commenting on that subject. If you're interested in including those commentaries or conference papers, are you interested in including those as well? It completely depends on you, how broad you want to go with your review. You might also want to include factors relating to population, intervention, type of study, and the outcome. It's basically you are the driver. You are going to decide what you want to do depending on what outcomes you have in your mind. You do a comprehensive literature search for systematic review. How you do that? You define the MESH terms. What are the MESH terms? MESH stands for medical subjective headings. These are comprehensive screening terms that you would use for your systematic review. And it's not like anything that comes to my head. I'm not just going to put that in. Whatever comes to my head, I will think about those terms and see if they are relevant. If they're not relevant, what are the other possible terms that I can think of? For example, I just mentioned, it literally just came to my head, but like cardiovascular, the effect of COVID, impact of COVID on cardiovascular diseases. When I say cardiovascular, I would use the term cardiovascular. I can use the term heart, blood vessels. These are all the terms that you can use, and many more. Like you have to come up with a list. You have to write it down on paper so that you can put it in your paper. When you publish it, you have to mention that these were the terms you used, so that if tomorrow I try to reproduce the same thing, I should get the same results that you got when you did your literature search. There are a lot of databases out there. There's PubMed, Embase, Cochrane. These are just some that I mentioned. There's clinicaltrials.gov. There's so many. So you have to decide what databases you want to include in your systematic review. You might choose 1, 2, 3, many more, depending on what access you have, because a lot of these require institutional access. So you might not have access to them. So it completely depends on you. And then after all these database search, where you get thousands of articles, you can also do a manual search. How would you do a manual search? You can do a reference review. For example, if you see a publication related to your area of interest, you can go to the reference list, the bibliography at the end of that. And then you can look at each of the papers that are there in the reference review and see that, okay, can I include that in my systematic review? Does this apply? And then you can add that to your search as well. That's another way of doing this. This is a Prisma checklist. This is like the gold standard of doing systematic reviews. Prisma, the way this started was that they first came out with a list for meta-analysis to make sure that everything is up to the mark, everything meets a certain standard, because there were some suboptimal studies that were coming out. So to address that issue, what happened was that they came out with a list of criteria for meta-analyses. Then in 1999, I think they made some changes to that to make sure that it applies to systematic reviews as well. So it works to our benefit because now we have a complete checklist for systematic reviews. It's 27 items. Here, I just clicked a screenshot of the first page. There are 2 pages. These are 15 items. What on this slide here. The way it works is when you're doing your systematic review, you can see there's a check boxes, like an empty box at the end where it says location where item is reported. You can easily see if you're, for example, systematic review, if you have a title that identifies the report as a systematic review, then you see the abstracts checklist. You describe the rationale for the review. You can put a tick mark next to each box if you're meeting the criteria. These 27 criteria you have to meet for your systematic review. And this is super helpful. When you start your process and you keep this in front of you, you will see what I'm trying to say here, that each of these helps you, it guides your systematic review. Through that, you would be able to fill up this. This is the Prisma diagram. The way it works is, as you can see, the first box here says records identified from databases, n equals 2. So here you would, for example, if you identified 2,000 articles from PubMed, you would say PubMed, n equals to 2,000. If you identified 1,500 articles from Embase, you would write Embase, n equals to 1,500. So all the articles that you found, you would list it here. If you look at the next box, records removed before screenings, there would be duplicates. Of course, there will be duplicates. There will be articles that are there in PubMed, and you will find similar articles that are the same articles in Embase as well. And you have to remove those duplicates. And then what this diagram, what it gets at is, you're basically listing every step. You're summarizing everything that you're doing. How many duplicates were removed? How many records marked as ineligible by automation tools? This is something that you will see in the database. How many records removed for other reasons? Why were they excluded? You have to put everything here. Records excluded. You also should keep a list of reasons for exclusion. Don't put it here in the table. There's no space for that here, but you can list it in your systematic review that, for example, 2,000 articles were extracted, and out of those 2,000 articles were retrieved from the database, and out of those 2,000 articles, 500 were excluded because of this reason. You put it there in your systematic review. The point of doing all this is to make it as detailed as possible. Your systematic review has, an ideal systematic review should mention all of these things. Data abstraction. This part is very important. This is where we extract data. Now that you have all the studies, out of those 2,000 or 3,500 articles that you got, you remove duplicates. You removed all of that stuff. You got your perfect studies. Let's say you end up with 150 articles. You got the complete versions. You don't have abstracts here. You have to get the full study. So you got complete full 150 studies in front of you now that you're planning on including in your systematic review. Now what are you going to do? Now you need at least 3 reviewers. Out of those 3, 2 reviewers will independently review those 150 articles, and whatever your outcomes are based on that, they will extract the data. They will extract data, and there's a 3rd reviewer who's overseeing everything. He's there supervising. And then in case of a contention, for example, if one reviewer says, oh no, I don't think it meets the criteria, I think this study should be excluded. The other person says, no, I think it meets the criteria, it should be included. The 3rd reviewer will step in and he or she, they will arbitrate whatever. And it is based on their decision that you will decide if the study needs to be included or not, or whatever the outcome is, whatever the contention, the issue of contention is, they will arbitrate on that. Then we have coding, which can also be useful for qualitative studies. Once you have all the data, you've extracted everything. Basically, once you're in the process of extracting data, you will notice trends. You will see what outcomes are Like, what are you getting from out of your studies, where the numbers are going up, where the numbers are going down. You will notice trends, you will identify themes, and this is what you need to report in your systematic review. You synthesize the findings. What were the gaps in research that you found from your initial literature search that you did? And then what is it that you found, the themes and trends that you noticed? Are there any contradictions to your findings? The first literature review that you did, do you think there's any contradictions there that you would report? How do they inform your research question? How do they answer your research question? Is there any additional research that needs to be done? Are there still any gaps that you can notice? And can you make any recommendations? Those recommendations can be something that can be used to inform policies tomorrow, for example. And those recommendations can also be, for example, there needs to be more study. We need more RCTs on this, whatever issue you're looking at. So what are your recommendations? And then identify any issues that may be associated with the research question. If at any point during this entire process, you feel like your question was not adequate enough, you can go back to revise your question. But again, based on that revision, you would have to redo the process of systematic review. The conclusion here is that the reader should be able to understand what you did in the systematic review, in the process of doing your systematic review, how you did it, and make sense of the findings as they relate to the research question. So you are answering your research question through your research, through your literature review and everything that you're doing, the entire process. You're answering your own question, but you're also being transparent about it so that tomorrow, if I want to repeat that, I will come to the same conclusion as you did. And this will inform your evidence-based medicine, whatever clinical practice. For example, tomorrow, if you do something in the clinic and there's no research, I will pull up your systematic review and I'll see that, oh, okay, so this is what the review says. Let's do this because this is evidence-based. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. That was brilliant, brilliant presentation in the time that you did it. There's a lot to talk about in systematic review, and many of us will agree that there's a lot to talk about. So we'll just open the floor for contributions, for questions, clarifications. We're going to show practical example in this session, where we're going to go to the internet, look at some papers, go step by step, and you see what we're talking about. In summary, I think what Dr. Maha has been able to convey to us that systematic literature review is reviewing literatures using a system, rather than someone just going to the internet, just type in, hey, cardiovascular mortalities in cardiovascular trend, right? And I just see first 10 Google searches just pop up, and I'll begin to read them and summarize and read them and summarize. That is a literature review. In a systematic review, according to Dr. Maha and other reputable sources, we design a system where we say, I'm going to review between this year and this year. I'll set in some set criteria. I'm going to review primary literatures or randomized studies or this, and I also put those inclusion criteria following that will address my research question. And then I synthesize, use the preferred reporting item checklist for systematic review and meta-analysis. So the preferred reporting item checklist is PRISMA. I use that checklist to follow the systems or the items in that checklist to make sure that I have a system that organizes what I'm doing, looking at these literatures. And the essence, according to Dr. Maha, is to ensure that you minimize bias. Because if you look at the normal literature review where you just type in cardiovascular mortalities, I could be biased, right? I'll pick and select and pick and choose what I want, and I produce a paper. But in systematic review, because you have a system, if someone else does it in Japan or in Canada or in New York, the person follows your system, the person will almost have the same result or the same conclusion or similar, or maybe two standard deviations away from the mean, what you had in your system. Dr. Endurance, I see your hand is up. Your voice, your thoughts. If you can also put on your video, that'll be fine, but if you cannot, that's fine.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Uh, okay, I'm actually where I can turn on my video. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation. Um, so I have a question.
Mhm.
My question is, at the point of data extraction, it's usually where I get confused a lot. The point of data extraction, there are various studies. For example, you have study A and study B and study C, and the parameters, the metrics that they use, they used, for example, this study used um, mean and standard deviation. The other study used confidence interval and percentage, and the other study used um, they used they measured the outcomes, same outcomes, similar outcomes, but with different measurements, metrics for measurement. How do we synthesize this information and put them as one? Or do we just set out with, okay, we are only taking studies that looked at the differences in mean and standard deviation? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the question. That's a very good question. When you extract that kind of data, I think that mostly comes, are you talking about meta-analyses?
So if I may chime in
Yes,
on
meta-analysis.
Yes.
meta-analysis. So if I may chime in on Dr. Endurance. So next week, we're going to have a discussion on meta-analysis. And I think that's that discussion will cover this question. So Professor Cahill will be giving us a talk on on how to conduct a meta-analysis. But Dr. Maha, go ahead.
Yes, no, it's a very interesting question. I'm just trying to think what I did for when I did my meta-analysis. Like, I'm just trying to think of the right approach for that. Because sometimes we have conversion tools that are there, but I'm specifically thinking about, I know you asked about standard deviation and confidence interval. Let me think about this and I'll get back to you. Let me just get a definitive answer because I'm thinking right now what I did, and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, so to also chime in on that question, I would like us to put these three things in spectrum: a literature review, a systematic literature review, and then a meta-analysis. One is at this end and the other one is at this end. So a literature review is one where I just go into, I type my topic or type whatever I'm interested in Google, for example, side effects of medication on whatever it is. And then I just write on whatever I find. So there's bias. In a systematic review, I follow a system, but I'm not analyzing the data. I'm just doing the same thing that the person did in literature review, just looking at a trend of a discussion, a summaries of reports or summaries of randomized trials or non-randomized primary trials or whatever, and I'm reporting them based on my question, my research question. In the last spectrum, the meta-analysis, I then analyze the endpoints of those data. So, but in systematic review, you do not necessarily have to analyze to see if the aggregates of these data that I got was statistically significant or not statistically significant. I think that's where the difference in the three sisters are, or what I call three brothers. Doctor, yeah, go ahead. Doctor,
Yeah, I just shared. Yeah.
go
Sorry, I
ahead.
was just going to answer that question. I just shared a calculator that I was talking about, that there is a way to calculate confidence intervals because I did it for one of my projects as well. The only complexity with that is you need more information. You need the sample size, for example. You need the sample mean. You need the standard deviation. I shared a calculator here. This one's more accurate than others. This is how you can, basically the point when you do meta-analysis is that you need the data point that is comparable in all the studies. So for example, if you have standard deviation in some and confidence intervals reported by some, you will try to get that one, for example, you're going to try to get just the confidence interval so that you can compare all the studies together. But to get that confidence interval, you need some more data. That data includes, like I mentioned before, the sample size, sample mean, standard deviation. Now, sometimes, and I've also gotten into these situations where you do not have that information, you don't get it. You look at the addendum, you look at the paper, you look at everything. When you cannot get that information from the paper, then you reach out to the researcher, the researcher, the author who worked on that paper, to get that information from them. And they do respond, because I've done that in the past, and they do respond to you. Their email addresses are there on the paper. You reach out to them if you cannot get that information off of that. If after trying everything, you're still unable to reach and get this information, then there are times when you have to extract that, when you have to, exclude that study in that specific metric. That also happens, but there are calculators, and usually it doesn't get to that level. But if it does, then yes, those are the possible solutions to that.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you, Dr. Endurance, for that brilliant question. I see your phone. I see your hand up, 2 hands up. iPhone. If you could please rename yourself so that I don't call you Dr. iPhone, so I can actually call your right name. But you could unmute yourself and probably introduce yourself if it's difficult to rename your name.
All right. So my name's Adiola,
Okay.
and I'm just I didn't realize it was on iPhone, but yeah, my question is, like, I have an issue with creating those words, like those buzzwords
Mesh
sometimes.
text.
Yes, for, like, I don't know how, sometimes, like, how much do you need to create? How little, sometimes, like, you're doing essential hypertension, and, I just don't know how far do you go? Or can you look at a similar paper? And I don't think they show that in the papers, how they create those words where, they could recreate them. And also, do we have exceptions? Can we include case studies, like some times when you don't have enough, when you can't find enough articles that are supporting your, and maybe the inclusion criteria doesn't allow you to, I don't know, can you include case studies, and how do you factor that in if it's just one person too?
Well, thank you. That's a very good question, Dila. We usually do not, again, when I say that, I'm just going to say that we do not include case studies normally, but again, it depends on how broad your review is. Ideally, we go for studies that are published, or RCTs, or more like, studies that have more subjects, because case studies are usually, they're just reports on one person, one patient, or just a few patients, up to 10 patients. They're not as detailed. We don't normally include them, but again, it completely depends on how broad your scope is. If you want to include that, then beware, there's going to be like tens and thousands of papers and case reports that you would have to go through. And there's not much benefit in doing that. So yeah, we usually don't do that. About the mesh terms, the way you do it is your research team would get together and then you brainstorm. You don't need 100 terms. You might just end up using 10 terms, for example. But again, there's no rule that it has to be a minimum of 10 terms. No, it can just be 4 terms as well, or 5 terms. As long as you cover the entire scope, or you think that you have covered, you're not leaving any area behind. That's important for research. So for example, when you talk about hypertension, it depends on what you're looking at through hypertension. You could include blood vessels. You could include, depending on what your outcomes are, you look at that. And then you can also look at similar papers, or the papers that you've done, and read them, and then see what are those 6-7 words that jump at you, or what are the 6-7 words that jump at you when you think of your research topic, or whatever your question is. When you're making that question, what are the words that jump at you that are extremely important? And then you think about it, just brainstorm, and then think about any other words that are, like that have similar meanings or that, that you can think of, and then you put them down. And that's fine if you don't include all. That's perfectly fine because you're being transparent. You will put those words down in your systematic review that these are the words I used. If there's anything missing, and if anyone else feels that, oh, you know what, this area is missing, they can do another systematic review on that by including that word. So it's perfectly fine. No one's going to, as long as you cover the main areas. You need to cover like all the main corners. As long as you don't skip anything major, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Hassan.
No
To
worries.
just chime in on that question on mesh term and if you can include case reports. So remember that the essence of systematic review is to create a system that is reproducible. So based on that definition, if you want to do a systematic review on case reports, that is also a systematic review, technically, even though that we don't encourage people or the science world or the scientific community usually wants people to do systematic review on primary research, randomized or primary research majorly. But if you are saying systematic review on case reports on cardiac mortality in the Blacks, right? So then you have to create a system that you are going to use to generate your paper, the number of papers that you're going to review. And that system has to be reproducible. So if I create a system that I'm going to use to generate case reports on cardiac mortality in Blacks, or cardiac mortality in immigrants, or cardiac mortality in people that smoke marijuana, that system has to be reproducible everywhere. And that becomes a systematic review. But like I said, the scientific world wants you to do those reviews in primary research. I hope that has helped to answer your question. Yes, I can see Dr. Holu. You can
Sorry,
unmute
just
yourself.
before that, sorry, just one more thing. I shared another link here that is a mesh generator. There are a lot of tools if you look for them. This is by the NIH National. So this is a pretty legit tool that you can use. And there are other tools as well. If you just go on it, and then if there's an abstract that you're thinking about, if you put that in, or there are any mesh terms that are coming to your head, for example, you mentioned hypertension, put that in, and it will give you all the other terms, whatever possible terms are there out there related to that, and then you can pick from those. So there's a lot of tools out there that you can also use. This is just one example of the tool that I shared in the chat. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maha, for being very resourceful. Dr. Holu, I could see your hand, and Dr. Endurance, I see your hand. Dr. Holu, you could unmute yourself and ask your question. Dr. Olu, are you there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the beautiful presentation, and thanks for organizing this. I know probably you have answered some of my questions in the course of the presentation, but I just need more information on this, especially for beginners like us. My question is, how can one put up the questions for research, like putting together things like ability to, if you are just want to cook out, just about starting a research, and you're thinking of, oh, what topic can I choose? So what are the things that guides your that guides you in searching for a topic? And then how can one write a literature review? And also the other question is, in the process of extracting your data, like if you want to write a paper, by the time you are doing your research, your search for articles you want to use, do you have to read the whole article completely in order to get the information you need? And lastly, in order to avoid things like plagiarism, right? How can you go about it, like when writing your literature review and all that stuff? Yeah, thank you.
So I unmuted Dr. Maha intentionally so that I could just chime in before she responds. We've been having this series of conversation, and I don't mean to take you back or to cut your question short, but we've had a a 2-hour discussion on how to generate research topics. I'll send you that link so you could just watch. We discussed robustly on how to generate ideas. And we also had a robust discussion on how to create a research question. But however, Dr. Maha, you could respond. So Dr. Holu, I'll send you those 2 links. You just look at them. It was a roundtable session like this, and everybody was, it was a very meaningful one. Dr. Maha, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you. I'll just expand on it a little bit because you mentioned that we already had a discussion on that. But one way you can do that is whatever your area of interest is, whatever subject interests you, you can just do a scoping review, like just like do a quick Google search on, for example, what's there. If you're reading up on an area, for example, and you know that, oh, no one has answered this question, or like, you know, I don't think anyone has looked into this, and how about I look into this subject? Or like I mentioned, COVID and cardiovascular disease right now, but what about this in a particular population subset? Like, has anyone studied this in, for example, South Asians? If not, then that could be a subject that you could do if you don't find anything. If you think there is a gap, if you identify a gap, it doesn't have to be extremely broad. You can bring it down to a particular country, you can bring it down to a population subset and think if anything has been published in them, and then do it on that. That is one way of doing it. And again, if you are actively involved in research or you review studies, you would be able to tell that, oh, you know what, more studies need, you'd be able to identify the knowledge gaps, the areas that need to be addressed. If not, then this is one approach that you can think about. It all starts with you, where your heart lies, what interests you. Is it clinical science? It can be social sciences, whatever, wherever your interest is. If you identify anything. And when we, so I did not mention the term scoping review first, but scoping review is when, you know, like, which is not systematic. So you just Google search and whatever articles you can see, if you write a review on that, that would be a scoping review, which is a very generalized review. So based on that scoping review, if you think that there's any deficiencies, any knowledge gaps, if you can identify those, that can be your topic of systematic review as well. And then, I'm sorry, I forgot the other question.
So he also said, you have to read the entire question. You have to read the entire paper.
That's important. You have to read the entire paper, and not just the paper. You also have to look for any addendums, if there was any additional, because what happens is once you publish a study and someone points out or questions for example, one of the methodologies that the author used, then many a times what they do is they publish addendums, which are some revisions, minor revisions to the paper. So you not only have to look out for the full text article, you also have to look for any addendums and address those as well. Add those to your systematic review.
So just also to add some flesh to what Dr. Maha has said, Dr. Holu, there are different layers when you're reviewing a literature. There are different layers, and with time you get to, it's just like someone who starts to write A, B, C, and after a while you learn how to scan through a paper in 10 minutes or less. The first layer is to look at the title. That's why we tell everyone, whenever you want to write a paper, make sure that your title almost captures what is in the paper, because there's what they call title screening, right? So when I look at your title, it tells me if this is cardiovascular. Let's say, for example, I've gone through the process of generating a research idea, and I have this idea to discuss cardiovascular mortality in the Blacks in South America, for example, or in North America. And then I created a system. I want to do a systematic review, and I created a system. And then I'm using my system to search for those papers. The first thing I do, from my experience, because I've been in this for a long time also, is to look at the title. If the titles don't tell me about cardiovascular mortality in Blacks, I quickly exclude it. I'm not going to read it. If it's telling me marijuana and this, whatever, or it's telling me about Takotsubo, whatever in this. So if the title doesn't almost address my research question, I just exclude it. That's what many of us do. Then the next layer is to read the abstract. And in reading the abstract, first thing is to read the background, and then you go read the conclusion. So why did they do this research, and what did they find? these two areas will also guide you, say, okay, this is related to what I'm about to address in my research question. Then I now go into the paper and read. So I do title screening, abstract screening. Then if it now goes, I do the entire paper. And I tell people, if you want to do a literature review, systematic or non-systematic literature review, you have to, first of all, read as much papers surrounding that topic that you want to review. For example, we are working on a project now on avocado, the effect of avocado in reducing cardiovascular mortality or cardiovascular morbidity. The first assignment that we gave ourselves is to read at least 50 papers on this topic, so that you will know where the world is, because the world has gone far in this thing. So you don't go and be discussing something of 1960 when the people are talking about something of 2021. Right, or 2022. So you read as much paper. First of all, give yourself like 2 weeks, and it's not something you do actively, like as if it's an 8-hour job. You could, while you're scrolling through your Twitter or your Facebook, you could just be scrolling through some papers, PubMed, Embase, Cochrane, and you'll be looking at it. Oh, okay. And I tell you, before you do this 3 minutes of browsing, 4 minutes of browsing, that's why these exercises are for academicians. They are not for baby brains. I will use the word baby brains who are easily distracted. All of us are almost in the academician or the academic sector. So we have some reasonable attention span. Give yourself like 3 or 4 minutes every day to scroll through those papers. Before you do that for 2 weeks, you would have gained reasonable knowledge. Also, another approach is to look at what other people have done. Remember that you are not the creator of knowledge. Someone must have done something similar to what you're doing somewhere. So look at what similar topics, similar ideas that have been created, or similar papers that have been published surrounding your area, and that will guide you on that knowledge that you want to generate. Except you're Albert Einstein who wants to discover a formula, or who wants to, do a groundbreaking thing. And when you are reading these papers, you will now be, like Dr. Maha said, you will now be identifying gaps, a lot of gaps, and then you now generate ideas on, oh, wow, someone has actually not looked at hypertension in pediatrics. Wow, or there are not enough papers on hypertension in pediatrics, or Takotsubo, whatever, or atrial myxoma in pediatrics. I love cardiovascular systems, so remind me, I'm using that a lot. And then that will become a research gap, and then you'll be like, oh wow, I need to look at how kids survive when they have cardiac attack. What happens post cardiac attack, cardiac myopathy in children? That becomes a research topic for you. Dr. Endurance, last few words. Well, we have about 7 more minutes to go.
Well, let me ask a question. Hi. Thank you very much for that, for Dr. Ma. Is there, so for example, when we do literature search, we have the option of having to selecting our literatures with advanced search methods. So when we are in PubMed or we're in Google Scholar, we can search for literatures with advanced. For example, I would say cardiovascular disease. Every literature that I search has to have specific words in the literature. For example, myocarditis and COVID-19. If we don't have myocarditis in the literature, and COVID-19 and myocarditis exclude those literature, can we also include this kind of selection into our systematic review?
Yeah,
that's
so that's
one.
a good question.
That's one. Then two, I had a lot of questions actually. I just forgot to talk about them. Then two, now what is not necessarily shortcuts, but what will be a quick way to go through systematically, go through this whole process in a time efficient way? Because most of us, we have other things we are doing. We want to get into research. The problem of research is that it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. So how do we manage time? How are we going to get quality research in a short amount of time? Do we need the help of applications? Do we need the help of, so please just help us, let us know. Thank you very much. All
right, so I think I'll answer the second question first. I I think it's just between you and your research team. You guys can divide your tasks, and you can have, for example, you can have more data extractors. You can, instead of just 2 data, I know the ideal is 2 and each person reviews all the articles and then extracts data. But if you guys are doing it responsibly, then if, for example, you have 50 articles and you have, let's say, at least 11 reviewers, you guys can divide the articles. Instead of reviewing all 50, you can do 10. 2 people can do 10 articles, and which means that each one of you will be reviewing the 10 and then extracting data and then comparing, and then one person will do the arbitration in case of contention. But there's no other way to speed it up. I guess just work faster. I mean, there's it takes months. That's the general, this is in general what they say. But if you speed it up, then of course you can do it in under a month. But yeah, it just means that you have to be more efficient in what you do and do everything responsibly, as I think the clip that Edward shared at the beginning, where Martin Luther King said that whatever you do, put your passion, put your heart into it, and make the best of that. With regards to the PubMed search, there are, yes, I was just going to share my screen to show you guys very quickly. Edwards, if that's okay with you.
Sure, absolutely.
Running out of time.
It's a roundtable session, practical. We want to see everything. I even intend us going through a typical literature review process, if we could just do it in 5 minutes. So what she's trying to do is to, Dr. Maha, what you're trying to do, she's trying to search. Let's say we have an already researched topic in mind. She's trying to put in her merge term. She's already generated a merge term. She is actually on one of the database. One of the database is PubMed, and she typed in PubMed in Google. PubMed popped up. She clicked on advanced and advanced. Dr. Maha, you could go back because you did it like a professor. Just go back. Okay. Go back again.
Yes,
Go back to like general Google, because we're trying to demystify this.
Okay, let's do it again then.
And why did she pick PubMed? She just chose, she could have chosen Embase, she could have chosen Cochrane, she could have chosen, DO, whatever. She could have chosen Google Scholar. So she chose PubMed, she went to PubMed, then there's a little advanced button under there. She clicks on advanced. PubMed is a repository, like a library that houses a lot of journals. So she's trying to search through those journals to see, go ahead, be moving. I'll allow you to talk.
For example, or let's do it on what you were saying. For example, avocado ad, and then you were looking at, for example.
So slow down. Sorry. So if you notice in this page where she is, there's a little button to the right of your screen called the and. There's also, if you drop down, there's an or. What the and means, it's all the merge terms, and what the or means is, if not hypertension, let's say, for example, COVID-19 or COVID-19. There are 2 types there are several ways people type COVID-19. Dr. Maha, can you just type COVID-19? So I'm trying to search for COVID-19. I'm also trying to search use it COVID-19. Same COVID-19, but spelling it in a different way. Space, no.
We can
space.
do
Could do COVID space 19, for example. So that whatever way the authors of different papers spelled out COVID-19 is going to pull up all SARS-19 or whatever SARS-CoV, there are different ways. So that's what the or is. The and means the other search terms that or the other mesh terms that you're going to add. Go ahead, Dr. Maha.
Yes. So, and then here you can also specify, you can see the dates right here, date of publication, for example. You can specify, for example, where do you want to start your search? Do you want to start from 1990s, what month, what date to present? And then you can add that. So you can see here that you can populate that as well. And then, oops, I press search. Oops, okay. But yeah, and then you press search and there you go. It does everything for you. And you have all these articles here. And you have this, you can bring it down, for example.
They change, yeah.
Yep, and there you go. Look at the number of pages here and the results that you have right here, because it's very broad. So this is because we used only avocado, hypertension, and COVID. So if you start adding more mesh terms, and it will narrow down your research, your focus area. It becomes more visible. So that's why you would get less results. The more focused, the more mesh terms you use, the more focused it would become. Your research will have a trajectory. Right now, it's very broad. But
Right.
yeah.
Dr. Maha, you could stay where you are. So if you look at the left-hand panel, scroll up, you'll see abstract, full script, full text. You can also use that to narrow down your search. So if you click on full text or abstract, that means you want to see only abstract. If you click on full text and abstract, you want to see abstract and full text. You can also click on types of research that you want to look. So if you click on meta-analysis, for example, Dr. Mara, click on meta-analysis, the search is going to pull up only meta-analysis that has full text. You could scroll down, you see additional filters. Click on additional filters. It will tell you if it's going to be English, case reports. Click on sex if you're doing that literature review on males or both. If you're doing language, click on language. You're going to see English, or you're doing it, or you're going to look on papers that were only published in English, or papers that were published in Dutch, and so forth and so forth. So there are so many filters on PubMed, and that's one of the reasons why PubMed is very popular, because it gives you this wide range of selecting your paper. And all these steps that we're doing right now is called the system. And we're going to write it in our methodology that we clicked on. We use this merge term. We went to PubMed, we used this merge term, we clicked on full text, we clicked on meta-analysis, it generated 556,000 papers, and then we narrowed it down to English, and it generated 40,000 papers, and we narrowed it down to this and that and that. Those steps are the system that we eventually call systematic, part of the system that we call systematic review. Dr. iPhone, I don't want to call you Dr. iPhone, but I don't know, I can't remember your name. If you can rename yourself, just you can unmute and ask a question.
Oh, thank you very much. So I was just gonna say, based on what Doctor asked about how to make it faster, I think a grading system can help. Like if you have a meta-analysis, maybe you name that M1. So everything that falls into M1, you separate that, or the ones that have more than 30 participants, or you can separate that. So that can help with breaking down things really fast, like giving them a code. I have randomized, so they're all meta-analysis, so they're all M1, so you can divide it that way and abstract results. And also, I also think that sometimes, because I was doing a paper and the way that I searched for it was looking for the surgical procedure that they used for a procedure. So sometimes like a surgical technique, you could just put that in, and that thing that you're looking for, maybe it's a drug or a device that they use that's under that surgical technique umbrella. So that would be a way to find that. That's just my contribution.
Thank you so much. That was very brilliant. We need you to attend our roundtables because you have very insightful, very meaningful contributions. Thank you so much. Dr. Endurance, I see your hands up. We're 2 minutes past our time, and because we want to respect people's time and their privacy and their space, we'll be ending the meeting after Dr. Endurance, after a brief summary from Dr. Maha. And of course, traditionally, how we end our meeting, we play the completion of the tape that we were playing before. So those that want to sit behind and listen to Dr. Martin Luther King talk, that would be great. If not, we'll be ending after Dr. Maha's summary. Thank you so
very much, Dr. Maha. I appreciate it.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Endurance.
I was thanking Dr. Maha. Thank you very much for
nice.
the session.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Maha. Before she gives her summary, this is IMG Research Academy. It's completely free for anybody to join us. We all come together to brainstorm on how we can demystify this thing called clinical research. We use the power of teamwork to leverage on our research processes and reduce the stress on each and every one of us. We are mostly doctors that are practicing, applying, students in different stages, masters, PhD, that are very interested in clinical research. We make this tape publicly available to everyone. And I also want to give a full disclaimer that this presentation does not represent me or does not represent my institution or anybody or my affiliates that I work for. I believe it's same for Dr. Maha also. Thank you so much. So Dr. Maha, in summary, systematic review.
Yes, so I think first, thank you. I think you guys are doing an amazing job, everyone here. And thank you for all the questions that I got. I hope I got to answer all of them. If not, please feel free to email them. And then I think I can coordinate with Edwards and get you the answers. There's so many tools out there, and it is so good to see the clinical curiosity that you guys have and do all this systematic review, all this research to answer that. It's amazing work. And trust the process, trust the systematic review, the process that is there. And if you follow the PRISMA guidelines, it would be very easy. Once you start looking, you will find the right topics. Edward shared a lot of resources with you guys. He mentioned the 2-hour the session that you guys did to explore ideas. There's a lot of ways to go about it. I would say just pick on like whatever your area of interest is. And it could be really small. It could be something like, I mean, I work, for example, in partner violence at my research institute. That's one of the things that we look at, the effective interventions to prevent partner violence or to screen women and men for partner violence during their visits to the clinic. That's one of my research interests that I spoke about. And you can just expand on that. So yeah, whatever area of research interests you, just start looking into that. Once you get in the habit of reviewing articles, not every day, you don't have to do it every day, even if it's just once a week, you're sitting down and seeing, oh, what new recommendations are coming out. Your mind would start processing things that way, that, oh, okay, like, you know, they answered this question, but what about that? They didn't talk about that. And then you would be like, okay, how about I jump on it and I'll do that. I'll look into this subject, you know, that can be my research question. So just keep at it. And yep, good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be ending the scientific session so that we can continue our tape. For those that want to stay behind, the talk from Dr. Martin Luther King was a brilliant one. It's going to just last for only 15 minutes. If you want to wait,